Good morning, church. This is Wednesday of Holy Week, and things are starting to heat up. Things are starting to get real in the text, in the story. So today we've gathered in the church kitchen. I'm filming from the church kitchen because there's something significant and powerful about the kitchen, about the church's kitchen. And there's something powerful about food and the table in the story of the gospel and the story of God. But what we also discover about the kitchen is that the kitchen is a special place in people's homes and in the life of the church. And part of the reason that is because the real conversations happen in the kitchen. The true conversations happen around the table. Sometimes it gets real in the kitchen and around the dinner table. And what we discover in our text today is that it gets real. Jesus gets brutally honest. Jesus calls out Judas. Let's listen to our passage today. This is John chapter 13, verses 21 through 32. Listen. After saying this, Jesus was troubled in spirit and declared, "Very truly, I tell you, one of you will betray me." The disciples looked at one another, uncertain of whom he was speaking. One of his disciples, the one whom Jesus loved, was reclining next to him. Simon Peter therefore motioned to him to ask Jesus of whom he was speaking. So while reclining next to Jesus, he asked him, "Lord, who is it?" Jesus answered, "It is the one to whom I give this piece of bread when I have dipped it in the dish." So when he dipped the piece of bread, he gave it to Judas, son of Simon Iscariot. After he received the piece of bread, Satan entered into him. Jesus said to him, "Do quickly what you are going to do." Now no one at the table knew why he had said this to him. Some thought that because Judas held the common purse, Jesus was telling him, buy what is needed for the festival, or that he should give something to the poor. So after receiving the piece of bread, he immediately went out, and it was night. When he had gone out, Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself and will glorify him at once." Yeah, Jesus is troubled. He can feel the tension. He knows what Judas is about to do. And Jesus gets real honest. He gets real. And he names it. He says, one of you is going to betray me. Now they didn't understand. They were confused and they asked, who is he talking about? And finally, Peter got the beloved disciple to ask Jesus so that they would know. And think about this. Jesus calls Judas out by giving him a piece of bread. He feeds him. He feeds him that bread of freedom, that bread of forgiveness, even though Judas is going to betray Jesus. Now, after Judas went out, Jesus says this. It's really interesting. Jesus says, "Now the Son of Man has been glorified." Once Judas was gone, once he was on his way to do what he was going to do, that is the moment that Jesus is glorified. And what we think is happening here is that now everything is set in motion. Now what's going to happen is going to happen, and there's no stopping it. Judas is going to betray Jesus. They're going to find Jesus, arrest Jesus, and crucify him. Now it cannot be stopped. And once it cannot be stopped, that is when Jesus is fully glorified. God is glorifying him. And when you think about it, Jesus could have stopped Judas. He could have said, Judas, stay here. Judas, I know what you're thinking. Don't do it. He could have put an end to it, but he didn't. He set him free to do what he was going to do. That is a sign of God's glory, that Jesus has accepted the fate to come, that he is willing to go the final distance to live out his calling, his sacrificial love. Yeah, it's Wednesday of Holy Week. Things are starting to heat up. It's getting real. And as we think about the honest conversations, the calling out, and the pain and struggle that Jesus is facing, perhaps the best that we can do to glorify Jesus, to worship Jesus today, is to think about the honest conversations we need to have. To think about what we need to name, what we need to call out, what we need to accept. What we need to accept is part of the cost of following Jesus. So, what are the honest conversations about faith that you need to have with your family, with your friends, with your loved ones? What are the real conversations that we need to have in the church? What do we need to call out? What evil intentions do we need to name? And how can we be faithful in accepting what God has called us to do, no matter what? These tough questions are important to have in the kitchen. The place where so much of our ministry and important ministry takes place. The place where we feed, where we enjoy God's goodness, and where we can have real conversations. May the Lord bless you and me as we get real with Jesus. Amen.